There is something strange happening in your life right now. Not loud, not dramatic, not obvious enough for other people to notice. But deep down, you can feel it. It's in those quiet moments when the room finally goes silent. It's in the way certain conversations don't feel the same anymore. It's in that strange feeling you get when you're surrounded by people, yet somehow feel completely alone. And here's what most people don't understand. The loneliness you're feeling may not be a sign that you're losing your way. It may be proof that you've already started leaving an old version of yourself behind. Because before every major transformation, there is a season where almost nothing makes sense. A season where your old life still exists, but your soul no longer belongs there. If this message found you at exactly the right moment, comment 777 below. Not for me, for yourself. As a reminder that something inside you recognizes this feeling. And stay with me until the end. Because what you're experiencing right now is much deeper than you think. Most people assume transformation feels exciting. They imagine clarity, confidence, momentum, a clear path forward. But real transformation rarely begins that way. It begins with confusion, with distance, with a strange sense that you're becoming someone new while still wearing the face of who you've always been. And that's exhausting, because nobody talks about the grief that comes with growth. Nobody talks about the sadness of outgrowing environments that once felt like home. Nobody talks about how painful it is to realize that some of the people you love most can only understand the version of you that no longer exists. So you sit there wondering what happened, wondering why old friendships feel forced, why certain places suddenly drain your energy, why conversations that used to excite you now leave you feeling empty. You tell yourself you're overthinking, you tell yourself you're being dramatic, you tell yourself you're imagining things. But you're not. You're noticing something real, a shift, a quiet one, the kind that happens internally long before it becomes visible externally. And the strangest part? Other people often feel this shift before you do. They notice your silence, your distance, your changed energy, your refusal to participate in things that once entertained you. They may not understand it, but they feel it. That's why some people start acting differently around you. That's why some relationships suddenly become uncomfortable. That's why certain individuals seem irritated by your presence, even though you've done nothing wrong. Because change makes people nervous, especially when they aren't changing themselves. Think about the last year. How much have you lost? Not just people, versions of yourself, dreams, expectations, beliefs, certainties. You thought certain things would last forever. They didn't. You thought certain people would stay. They left. You thought certain doors would open. They remained shut. And every disappointment left a mark. Not necessarily a visible one, but a mark nonetheless. A scar hidden beneath your smile. A wound disguised as maturity. A grief you rarely talk about, because after a while, you become tired of explaining your pain. You become tired of telling people you're struggling. You become tired of hearing generic advice from people who don't understand the battle you're fighting internally. So you stop talking. You carry it quietly. You smile. You function. You go to work. You answer messages. You do what needs to be done. But inside, something feels different. And maybe that's because the person you're becoming requires a different life than the one you've been living. Let that sink in, because that realization changes everything. The version of you that existed 5 years ago wanted different things, needed different things, tolerated different things, but you're not that person anymore. And sometimes the hardest part of growth is accepting that. Sometimes we keep trying to force ourselves back into old identities because they're familiar, even when they've become too small, even when we've outgrown them, even when staying there hurts more than leaving. Imagine trying to wear shoes from childhood. No matter how much you loved them, they won't fit anymore. Not because the shoes changed, because you did. And that is exactly what's happening in your life. You're growing beyond spaces that once fit perfectly. You're expanding beyond limitations that once defined you. And growth like that creates friction. It creates tension. It creates loneliness. Because every expansion requires separation from something, a habit, a belief, a relationship, a version of yourself. Nothing grows without leaving something behind. Nothing. If you felt this separation recently, comment 111 below. There are more people experiencing this than you realize. Here's a truth that few people are prepared to hear. The people around you may not actually miss you. They may miss the version of you they had access to. There's a difference. They miss the version that always said yes. The version that stayed small. The version that made them comfortable. The version that never challenged expectations. The version that carried everyone else's emotional weight. But what happens when that version disappears? What happens when you start setting boundaries? What happens when you stop apologizing for existing? What happens when you stop chasing approval? What happens when you stop shrinking yourself? Suddenly people accuse you of changing. And they're right. You did change. You had to. Because survival required it. Healing required it. Growth required it. And deep down, you know that. There were nights nobody saw. Nights where exhaustion wrapped itself around your nervous system. Nights where your mind refused to stop spinning. Nights where you stared at the ceiling wondering how much longer you could keep carrying everything. Not because you were weak, because you were tired. There's a difference. A huge difference. Weakness says, I can't continue. Exhaustion says, I've been carrying too much for too long. And many people watching this don't need motivation. They need rest. They need permission to stop fighting every battle. They need permission to stop proving themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They need permission to release responsibilities that never belonged to them in the first place. Maybe that's why this message found you today. Not to push you harder, not to pressure you into becoming more, but to remind you that becoming who you're meant to be sometimes begins by letting go. Not holding on tighter, letting go. And that's where things start getting interesting. Because what you're about to discover next changes everything. Most people believe transformation begins when something new enters their life. A new opportunity, a new relationship, a new breakthrough. But that's not actually how it starts. The process begins much earlier. It begins when something old starts leaving, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. At first, you barely notice. Then one day you wake up and realize your old life no longer feels like home. And that's exactly where many of you are right now, standing between two versions of yourself. One that's ending, one that's being born, neither completely visible, both pulling on you at the same time. And that's why your heart feels conflicted. That's why your spirit feels restless. That's why you keep sensing something is about to happen. Because something is, but it's not what most people expect. The biggest shift coming into your life isn't an external event. It's an internal awakening. And once that awakening fully arrives, the people around you won't be able to ignore it anymore. If you're still here, comment, still here. Because the next part goes deeper than most people are ready for. And what you're about to understand isn't about what is coming toward you. It's about what is finally losing its hold on you. And that's when the loneliness becomes impossible to ignore. Not because people disappeared, not because your phone stopped ringing, not because the world suddenly abandoned you, but because you started seeing things you couldn't unsee. You began noticing how many conversations were built on performance instead of connection. How many relationships survived only because you stayed silent about what you truly felt. How many environments rewarded the version of you that was exhausted. The version that sacrificed, the version that carried everyone else's burdens, the version that never asked for anything in return. And once you see that, you can never fully go back. That's the painful truth nobody prepares you for. Awareness changes everything, because awareness creates a choice, and choices create separation. There comes a moment in every transformation where you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That shift sounds small, but it changes your entire life, because victims search for blame, growth searches for meaning, and many of you are standing at that exact crossroads right now. The betrayal that broke your heart, the opportunity that disappeared, the friendship that slowly faded, the relationship that left you questioning your worth. You thought those moments were destroying you, but what if they were revealing something? What if those experiences weren't punishment? What if they were exposure? Exposure to what no longer belonged in your life. Exposure to patterns that were quietly draining you. Exposure to the ways you abandoned yourself just to keep others comfortable. Because sometimes the greatest blessing isn't getting what you wanted. It's finally seeing clearly why it never worked. Think about the people you chased, the validation you sought, the approval you begged for internally. How much energy did that cost you? How many nights did you spend replaying conversations, analyzing messages, wondering if you were enough, wondering why someone couldn't see your value? Meanwhile, you were standing in front of a mirror, unable to see it yourself. That is the hidden tragedy. Not that they failed to recognize you, that you forgot to recognize yourself. And healing begins the moment that changes. The moment you stop measuring your worth through someone else's ability to appreciate it. Because some people only know how to value what they can control. And the moment they lose control, they lose interest. But your worth was never supposed to depend on their recognition. It existed long before they arrived. And it remains long after they leave. If you've learned this lesson the hard way, comment 111 below, because this realization costs most people years of unnecessary suffering. Let's talk about something deeper, the exhaustion you've been feeling. Not physical exhaustion, soul exhaustion, the kind that sleep can't fix, the kind that vacations can't fix, the kind that follows you into quiet rooms, the kind that sits beside you when everyone else is asleep. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that feeling of constantly carrying invisible weight, the pressure to hold everything together, the pressure to stay strong, the pressure to keep moving, the pressure to keep believing, even when you're running on empty, especially then. And after a while, your nervous system starts speaking a language your mind doesn't understand. You lose interest in things you once loved. You withdraw. You become quieter, more reflective, more distant. People assume you're changing. And again, they're right. You are, because your soul is demanding something different, something slower, something deeper, something real. What many call loneliness is actually a period of recalibration, a season where your inner world is being reorganized. A season where old identities are dissolving, and dissolving hurts, because identities don't leave quietly. They fight for survival. The people pleaser fights, the overachiever fights, the rescuer fights. The version of you that depended on external approval fights. Every old identity tries to convince you to stay the same, to stay safe, to stay familiar. But growth doesn't happen inside familiarity. Growth happens inside uncertainty. Growth happens when you stop knowing exactly who you are and trust that a stronger version is emerging, even if you can't fully see them yet. Have you noticed something lately? Certain things no longer excite you. Certain goals no longer motivate you. Certain dreams no longer feel aligned. That can feel frightening, because people often mistake evolution for failure, but they aren't the same thing. Sometimes your soul outgrows dreams the same way it outgrows environments. The dream wasn't wrong. It simply belonged to an older version of you, a version that needed different lessons, different experiences, different outcomes. And now you're being invited into something deeper, something more authentic, something closer to who you truly are. But authenticity comes with a cost. You lose access to old masks, and that can feel terrifying, because masks provide protection. Even when they create suffering, there is a reason this season feels so uncomfortable. You are standing between certainty and possibility, between who you were and who you're becoming, and the space in between is rarely peaceful. It is confusing, messy, emotional, unpredictable. One day you feel powerful, the next day you feel lost. One day you're certain, the next day you're questioning everything. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're transforming. And transformation is rarely linear. The people around you may not understand this. Some will think you're becoming distant. Others will think you've changed too much. Some may even accuse you of becoming cold. But what they're witnessing isn't coldness. It's discernment. You're learning where your energy belongs. You're learning who deserves access. You're learning that not everyone is entitled to your time, your attention, your emotional labor, and that lesson alone changes lives. Because once you stop giving everyone unlimited access to your energy, everything starts improving. Your peace improves. Your focus improves. Your clarity improves. Your confidence improves. Not overnight, but steadily, powerfully, inevitably. If you're still here, comment 777, not because of superstition, but because you've stayed long enough to hear something many people avoid. Growth isn't glamorous. It's lonely. It's uncomfortable. It's emotional. It's deeply human. And yet, it's worth every second, because something extraordinary is happening beneath the surface. Something you haven't fully realized yet. The person you were is slowly releasing their grip, and the person you're becoming is getting stronger every day. Even on the days you don't feel it, even on the days you doubt it, even on the days you want to quit, the process is still working. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because most people think the hardest part is losing people. It isn't. Most people think the hardest part is uncertainty. It isn't. The hardest part comes later. The moment you realize the life you've been asking for will require a version of you that doesn't exist yet. A version stronger than the one who started. A version wiser than the one who suffered. A version calmer than the one who panicked. A version freer than the one who constantly sought approval. And that realization changes everything. Because suddenly, you understand why the delays happened, why the waiting happened, why the solitude happened, why the struggle happened. Not to break you, to build someone capable of carrying what comes next. And in part 3, we're going to uncover the truth almost nobody is prepared to face. Because receiving the next chapter is not the challenge. Becoming the person who can sustain it is. If this message resonates with your journey, subscribe to the channel. Not because a subscription creates luck, but because sometimes one message arrives at exactly the moment you need it most. And the next message may be the one that helps you recognize what is already changing inside you. Comment 888 if you're ready for the next chapter. And this is where everything changes. Because the blessing was never just about what was coming into your life. It was about who you needed to become before it arrived. Most people spend years praying for a different future, a better opportunity, a healthier relationship, more abundance, more peace, more clarity, more purpose. But very few people stop to ask a deeper question. If everything you've been asking for suddenly appeared tomorrow, would you actually be ready to carry it? Not receive it, carry it, because those are two very different things. Receiving something is a moment. Sustaining it is an identity, and identities are not built overnight. They are built through pressure, through loss, through uncertainty, through seasons that make absolutely no sense while you're living through them. Think about the strongest people you've ever met. The ones who walk into a room carrying a quiet confidence. The ones who don't need attention to feel valuable. The ones who remain calm when everyone else is panicking. The ones who seem deeply grounded. Rarely were they built in comfort. Rarely were they created through easy victories. Most were shaped in seasons nobody witnessed. Seasons where they questioned everything. Seasons where they felt forgotten. Seasons where they had to learn how to stand alone. And perhaps that's what this season has really been teaching you. Not how to receive more, but how to become more. Because the next chapter of your life requires a stronger foundation than the last one. There is a hidden truth many people never discover. Sometimes what you're calling a delay is actually development. Read that again. Sometimes what feels like stagnation is preparation happening beneath the surface. Imagine planting a seed. For weeks, nothing appears. No evidence. No visible progress. Nothing exciting. Nothing dramatic. Yet beneath the soil, an entire root system is forming. The roots develop before the growth becomes visible, because what rises higher must first grow deeper. And perhaps that's exactly what has been happening inside you. While you were worrying about what wasn't happening outside, something was being built within. Patience, discernment, wisdom, resilience, self-respect, inner peace. The very qualities your future will require. The strange thing about transformation is that it often feels like loss before it feels like gain. You lose certainty. You lose familiarity. You lose old identities. You lose outdated expectations. And for a while, all you can see is what disappeared. But eventually, a realization arrives. A powerful one. You begin noticing that what left your life wasn't always protecting you. Sometimes it was limiting you. The relationship that ended, the opportunity that collapsed, the door that remained closed, the approval you never received. Maybe those things weren't removed to punish you. Maybe they were removed because they could not accompany you into the next chapter. Not everything is meant to follow you forward. Some things belong to previous versions of your story. This is the moment many people resist. The moment they realize they can no longer return to who they used to be. Not because they don't want to, because they can't. Growth changes your vision. And once your vision changes, your reality changes. You begin seeing patterns you once ignored. You begin noticing energy you once tolerated. You begin recognizing environments that quietly drain your spirit. And suddenly, what once felt normal feels impossible to continue. That isn't failure, that's awakening. And awakenings are rarely comfortable. If this resonates with your journey so far, comment 888 below. Not because a number has power, but because sometimes making a declaration helps us recognize where we truly stand. Comment 888 if you know deep down that you're not the same person you were a year ago. There is something else you need to understand. The future you're moving toward doesn't need the fearful version of you. It doesn't need the version constantly seeking permission. It doesn't need the version waiting for universal approval. It doesn't need the version shrinking to fit other people's expectations. That version served its purpose. It helped you survive. But survival and fulfillment are not the same thing. At some point, you have to stop surviving and start living. And that transition is one of the most frightening experiences a human being can have, because survival feels familiar, freedom feels uncertain. Yet freedom is exactly where your soul has been trying to guide you. Maybe that's why life has felt different lately. Maybe that's why you felt detached from things that once consumed your attention. Maybe that's why your intuition keeps nudging you toward change. Because your spirit already knows what your mind is still trying to understand. The chapter is ending, not your story. The chapter and endings always feel emotional, even healthy endings, even necessary endings, even divinely timed endings. Because endings require grieving, not just grieving what happened, grieving what could have been, grieving expectations, grieving imagined futures, grieving versions of yourself that never fully came to life. That grief is real, and you don't need to pretend otherwise. One of the greatest signs of maturity is learning how to honor your grief without becoming trapped inside it, to acknowledge what hurt, without allowing it to define you, to remember what happened, without building your identity around it, to learn from your pain, without living inside your pain forever. That is strength, real strength, not pretending you're okay, not suppressing emotions, not acting invincible. Real strength is remaining open after disappointment, remaining hopeful after setbacks, remaining capable of love after heartbreak, remaining willing to trust life again after uncertainty. And if you're still capable of that, you are stronger than you realize, far stronger. Now let me tell you something many people need to hear. The fact that you're still here, still listening, still searching, still hoping, still growing, means you haven't given up. And that matters, because life changes dramatically for people who refuse to quit on themselves. Not immediately, not magically, but inevitably. The person who keeps learning eventually becomes wiser. The person who keeps healing eventually becomes healthier. The person who keeps growing eventually becomes unrecognizable to their former self. That process is already happening inside you, whether you can see it yet or not. A year from now, many things currently stressing you will no longer matter. Many questions keeping you awake tonight will already have answers. Many fears that seem overwhelming today will feel surprisingly small. And one day you'll look back at this season, not with resentment, but with understanding. You'll realize this wasn't the season that broke you. It was the season that introduced you to yourself. The real you. The version hidden beneath fear, hidden beneath doubt, hidden beneath survival mode. The version that was quietly emerging all along. Before we finish, take a moment and think about how far you've already come. Not how far you still need to go. How far you've come. The battles you've survived. The lessons you've learned. The strength you've developed. The wisdom you've earned. The resilience you've built. Most people only see what remains unfinished. Very few stop to appreciate what has already been accomplished. Do that today, because the person reading these words right now has already overcome things they once believed would destroy them. Never forget that. And perhaps that is the final message. You were never becoming someone completely different. You were becoming more fully yourself, the strongest version, the wisest version, the most authentic version, the version no longer willing to abandon itself for acceptance, the version no longer willing to trade peace for approval, the version no longer afraid of standing alone if standing alone means remaining true. That version is here now, emerging, breathing, awakening, and the world will eventually notice. But by then, their recognition won't matter as much as it once did, because you'll finally recognize yourself. If you've stayed until this moment, comment, "I understand now," because very few people make it this far. And if this journey spoke to something deep inside you, subscribe to the channel. Not because subscriptions create miracles, but because growth often happens through reminders. And sometimes the right message arrives precisely when your soul is ready to hear it. Remember this: you are not losing your life. You are outgrowing it. You are not falling apart. You are reorganizing. You are not being abandoned. You are being redirected. And what feels like an ending today may someday become the moment you realize everything truly began. The chapter is closing. The new one has already started. Welcome to the next version of yourself.